Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Ow! Hot off the press, I'm holding the latest March 2023 issue of Guitar World magazine. Rather than read the whole thing from cover to cover, I picked one particular article that stood out to me. This absolutely awesome article was written by Brad Tolinski. He counted down the top 10 greatest moments in electric guitar history. So, let the countdown commence. Number 10. Les Paul begins work on the Log solid body electric guitar, 1939. While most players in the 1940s were thrilled with Gibson's groundbreaking ES-150, radio personality and superstar guitarist Les Paul was less than impressed. At higher volume levels, the 150 was prone to feedback, which annoyed the heck out of him. So, sometime in 1939, Paul started messing around with an idea that began with the 1932 Ropat in Electro A25 frying pan, a solid body guitar. Going back to square one, Paul started with a 4x4 inch slab of pine, roughly the length of a conventional art shop guitar body, attached to a bridge, two wood-covered pickups that he made himself, and then handcrafted vibrato tailpiece. He then attached wings to both sides of the block to make it look and feel more like a conventional guitar. To his delight, when he finally plugged it in, it sounded pretty good, and it didn't feed back. Les was elated with his invention, which he nicknamed the Log, but when he brought the guitar to Gibson in 1941, they laughed at his broomstick with a pickup. Little did the company know, a decade later, Les would get the last laugh when a refined version of his signature broomstick would become one of the most revered guitars of all time. Here's a picture of the Log. It looks lovely. Number 9. American swing guitarist George Barnes makes the first commercial recording of an electric guitar in sessions with blues artist Big Bill Broonzy, March 1st, 1938. Many of you, okay, all of you, are probably unfamiliar with the name George Barnes, but back in the 20th century, he was a pretty big deal. According to Music Union files, Barnes played on more recording dates for more people than any other guitarist in history, appearing on some 100 blues records in the 1930s alone. His session career continued to thrive for the next 2 decades, appearing on another couple hundred albums, including those recorded by Frank Sinatra, jazz legend Louis Armstrong, and country artist Homer and Jethro. He was even the first person to play an electric guitar in a Bob Dylan recording, the unreleased 1962 track Mixed Up Confusion. But when he's mentioned these days, it's usually because he was arguably the first to record with an electric guitar, namely on Big Bill Broonzy's vibrant 1938 classic, It's a Low-Down Dirty Shame. Barnes rips it up with a collection of dazzling jazzy licks that are both electrified and electrifying. Number 8. Gibson delivers the first ES-150, November 20th, 1936. If the frying pan opened the door for the electric guitar, then the Gibson Guitar Corporation's ES-150 blew the entire barn down. The ES stood for Electric Spanish, and the 150 reflected how much the guitar cost, $150 with an amplifier. Gibson had tried getting electric guitars onto the market as early as 1933, but their early attempts were somewhat primitive. Inspired by George Beauchamp's revolutionary pickup for the frying pan, Gibson commissioned Walter Fuller to develop their own electromagnetic pickup that would better Beauchamp's. Within weeks, Fuller succeeded, managing to create what is now commonly known as the Blade pickup, which is still coveted by jazz players today. Guitarists flipped their lid for the hollow body guitar, and early players included legends like Eddie Durham, Floyd Smith, and the most famous of them, Charlie Christian, who gave the ES-150 near mythical status. Here's a picture of the extraordinary ES-150. Number 7. The first public electric guitar performance on October 31st, 1932. If you play Master of Puppets in a forest and there's no one around to hear it, does it make a sound? Probably, but let's face it, playing guitar is usually more satisfying when there's an audience to appreciate it. The very first scale of an A25 frying pan was to Wichita, Kansas guitarist Gage Brewer, who made the purchase on September 21st, 1932. He also holds the distinction of having given the first ever known public performance with it. A press release issued to promote the concert informs us it took place at the Shadowland Pavilion, a Wichita nightclub that Brewer also owned, on Halloween night 1932. We are at this time introducing the world's newest and most sensational instrument, the release crowed, a new invention which is startling to the music world, making possible a combination of natural personal technique and electrical perfection. Indeed. Number 6. The production model of the Rowe-Patton Electro A25 frying pan hits the market in September of 1932. Now we're cooking with fire! Hailed as the first successful commercially produced electric solid-body guitar, the Rowe-Patton Electro frying pan wasn't much to look at, but it sounded fine and you could coax a respectable amount of volume out of it without incurring feedback. Invented by guitarist George Beauchamp, the frying pan, nicknamed because its circular body and long neck made it resemble a frying pan, featured an aluminum body and a pickup that incorporated a pair of horseshoe magnets that arched over the strings. While it was overshadowed by the flood of electric guitars that followed in its wake, true six-string aficionados will always regard the A25 as the indisputable Big Bang. Number 5. The Stromberg Voisinette Electro. The first commercial electric guitar is introduced to general indifference, 1928 through 1929. The Stromberg Voisinette Electro was, by all reports, a substantial leap forward from George Breed's initial crude attempt at building an electric guitar. It employed an electromagnetic pickup device mounted beneath the top of a conventional hollow-body guitar, and it was capable of transforming vibrations from the instrument's wooden top into an electric signal that could be amplified. So far, so good. But what did the SV Electro sound like? It's difficult to say because no surviving examples are known to exist. Only a small number of those guitars were produced in 1928, and by mid-1929 they had completely vanished from the marketplace. While some blame the Electro's failure on the Great Depression, historians have long speculated that so few players bought them because they sounded terrible, and those who did eventually tossed them in the trash. Number 4. The first paper cone loudspeaker is developed by Chester Rice and Edward Kellogg, 1921 through 1925. If you think an electric guitar without an amp sucks, how about an amp without speakers? Yeah, the electric guitar needed those too. Luckily, Chester W. Rice and Edward W. Kellogg, a couple of clever dudes that worked at General Electric Laboratories, put their heads together and came up with the modern loudspeaker, which combined the moving coil driver mechanism with a paper cone diaphragm. They invented the concept in 1921, but it took until 1925 to improve the acoustics enough to compete with existing horn loudspeakers. The speaker's advantage was that it had a flatter frequency response than horn speakers, and could reproduce adequate bass without the enormous length of sound path required in horns. Here's a picture of the primitive paper cone loudspeaker. Number 3. Lee DeForest patents the first electronic amplification device on January 29, 1907. Let's face it, an electric guitar without an amp sucks, and that's where Lee DeForest comes in. DeForest's father was a congregational church minister who hoped his son would also become a pastor. Instead, the young man invented the first electronic device for controlling current flow, the 3-element Audion triode vacuum tube. This jump-started the electronic age and enabled the development of the electronic amplifier, which years later would be used by bands like Slayer. So much for being a pastor's son. DeForest also boasted that he made, then lost, 4 fortunes. Sounds like our kind of guy. Number 2. The first patent for an electric guitar design is given to inventor George Breed on September 2, 1890. In September 1890, U.S. Navy officer George Breed was granted a patent for a design for an electrified guitar. His design was based on a vibrating string and electromagnetic field, but his guitar was small and extremely heavy. and it produced only exceptionally bizarre sustained sounds reminiscent of a cat in heat. Breed is now almost completely unknown, and his instrument now resides in the dustbin of obscurity, but hey, you gotta start somewhere. Number 1, drum roll please. The nation's first electricity-generated power station opens its doors September 4th, 1882. What does the first power station have to do with the electric guitar? Well, you can't have an electric guitar without electricity, you big dummy. In 1882, Thomas Edison helped form the Edison Illuminating Company of New York, which brought electrical lights to parts of Manhattan, but progress was, shockingly slow. Most Americans still lit their homes with gas lights and candles for another 50 years. Only in 1925 did half of all homes in the U.S. have electrical power, and it wasn't until 1960 that virtually all dwellings had electricity. We'll end with a picture of the intriguing inventor, Thomas Edison. Well, that's the end of the article. Personally, I believe that the best electric guitar moment ever happened when Jimi Hendrix did a spectacular Star-Spangled Banner performance at Woodstock in 1969. What about you? What do you consider to be the greatest electric guitar moment of all time? Let me know in the comments. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.